Okay, here we go. If you could all take your seats, we're about to get started.
One.
You won't want to miss a minute of this discussion.
Yes, I hope so. I hope he does it.
Yeah. All right. So I think we'll get started, and people will file in and take their seats, I'm sure, and they may even be a little bit quiet in the back. Yeah. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, also known as the token male on the stage tonight, which I'm very proud of. This evening, it's my privilege to welcome you to our panel discussion, International Women Leaders on the Future of Ukraine, part of Ukraine House Davos series of curated events this week. We're gathered here as friends of Ukraine and also as Ukrainians who want to see a peaceful and prosperous Ukraine with secure borders at an immensely important time for the nation. The Atlantic Council ramped up its activities when we saw the gathering threat to Ukraine because we see the freedom of Ukraine, the sovereignty of Ukraine, the independence of Ukraine as an issue that goes way beyond Ukraine's borders in terms of importance, not only for Europe and the region, but also for the world. We're honored to be a partner in this important event to showcase opportunities and developments for the future of this dynamic country. So first and foremost, thank you to the Ukraine House Davos Organizing Committee, its generous supporters for fostering this dialogue, and special thanks to the Executive Director, Alexa Chopivsky. There's Alexa. How are you? And tell your father that I just barely forgive him for not being here this evening. But her father is a board member of the Atlantic Council. I also want to acknowledge other Atlantic Council board directors. I don't think Victor is here right at the moment, is he? But Victor Pinchuk is on our International Advisory Board. Ian Inatovich, hello, how are you? Great to see you here. And Milan Verveer is on our board. So I'll introduce her and other guys right there. And then it's just wonderful to see Paul Grod, the head of the Ukraine World Congress. How lucky we are to have you working in this position. And it's been an honor to work with you over the years at the Atlantic Council. At the Atlantic Council, we're acutely aware that the ongoing war in Ukraine's east is critical to the future of the global order and transatlantic security. And at its core, it's about the future of Europe whole and free. And that's why in February 2014, we launched our Ukraine and Europe initiative. It galvanizes international support for an independent Ukraine within secure borders whose people will determine their own future. Those words are chosen carefully. The Council's work aims to strengthen Ukraine's security, preserve its territorial integrity, and advance democratic, economic, and governance reforms. And since its founding, the Council's Eurasia Center has become a go-to resource on issues pertaining to Ukraine and the Eurasia region at a time of tremendous importance and change. So fast forward to the present, while clear progress has been made, Ukraine still finds itself facing two challenges, combating Kremlin aggression and completing the domestic reforms that will make Ukraine compatible with EU norms and draw further investment to grow in the economy and make the country less easy to undermine from the outside. And while it's crucial to focus on the Kremlin threat, Ukraine must concentrate internally as well. At this crucial moment, and believe me, at the end of this, I'm going to turn totally to our panelists, but I just wanted you to know where the Atlantic Council stands. At this moment, the international community must continue to coordinate efforts to support Ukraine's development, setting a path towards security and prosperity. Strong leadership, bold thinking are essential to addressing these challenges and helping shape Ukraine's future. My own personal view is we haven't done enough yet after the Sea of Azov incident, and my expectation is more will come, or perhaps that's my hope. But we can get into that as well. So today we're lucky to be joined by leaders, a group of incredibly distinguished women who will share with us their insights and innovative inputs on the future of Ukraine. So it's my privilege to introduce Yeva Ilves, from the Latvian Ministry of Defense and former First Lady of Estonia. Ivana Klimpish-Tsintsadze. I always want to add too many vowels. Deputy Prime Minister for Ukraine and for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And then Ambassador Milan Verveer, first U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, Special Representative on Gender Issues for the OSCE Chairmanship, and Executive Director of Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. Let me open, maybe working from left to right, facing out there, with an initial framing question, just to get each of you to give us a little bit of a lay of the land of where, of all the things you're concerned about regarding Ukraine right now, what's top of the list? What is it that you think we have to pay the most attention to? And then of all the opportunities and potential for Ukraine's development, give your top pick for that as well, just to get a feeling of where you see the biggest opportunity, the biggest chance, and also the largest danger. Maybe we start with you, Yeva.
Good evening, and first I'll express my thanks for being invited here. I think I always cared a lot of our neighborhood of Latvia and Estonia, since I carry two hats. And it's my big pleasure, and thanks Alexa for ringing up, and then for the years we spent together in Hopkins that has brought us back together. So on Ukraine, it's very difficult, of course, to single out because things are connected, and if one thing doesn't work, it kind of influences the other ones. But I came here because we are currently living in California, so I flew in here from US, and I have to say that Europe is a great value. And even flying from US into Europe, you feel a big difference. And so when I was coming here and thinking about Ukraine, I really wanted to emphasize and re-emphasize that Ukraine is and has to be and has to remain European. That it's a great value to be a European country, to be part of Europe, to be democratic, to be with freedoms, having the freedoms and rights, and having the culture, having the rule of law, having the democracy. So the sense, even coming from another democracy, another democratic big country like US, landing in Europe, it still felt a big difference and a big relief calling myself being a European, feeling the sense that I am from Europe, and that I think it's a big goal and a big destiny and a big part for Ukraine to be European. So I really hope and see Ukraine's future as a European country with all those attributes that come, and I hope that Europe itself will be in a good shape to be a good place of democratic countries. So that would be sort of something that I see as a future. And I don't know,
So that's the biggest opportunity, and that's a good one to start with. That's a good big opportunity that I think we can all embrace. And the danger?
The danger, of course, is, I think, the whole global danger. It's obviously Russia and geopolitical situation. But I would even say not only Ukraine's geopolitical situation, but the global situation. We feel threat of Russia not only at the border of Ukraine, but at the borders of US or within US, living in the US. So I think that is a big challenge, and it's not only a challenge of one country, but the whole democratic society. So that's something that Ukraine obviously faces in a very direct way, but we all face it together, and that's, I think, is a very big challenge for all of us to figure out what to do with it.
Let me ask one follow-up question on that before I go to Milan. So this is an audience that knows its stuff and has been watching Russia in Ukraine and Russia on Ukraine for a while. So drill down a little bit further on the danger. Is it military? Is that overdone? Is it electoral undermining? Is it economic action? I mean, if you're actually tearing, because we've been caught by surprise by Putin before, and I think the best way not to be caught by surprise is to think about what the next surprise might be, and so I'm just wondering what you see as if you're tearing the concern. Where's your concern?
Well, of course, from my point where I sit, and in a way, I feel it's not right to compare because I think the military action on the ground is really horrible. I mean, the number of victims, of people that have lost their lives, it's not comparable. But of course, what worries me on a global scale, I think the fact that Russia can manipulate open, liberal democracies, that it can manipulate people's minds and hearts in a way that they do not notice, or in a way that the damage is done, and only then we figure out what has happened. So I think the soft power or power of technologies that, and sort of soft power goes with sort of finances, economy, but also merging in technologies is a really, really big concern for me. And it's the country clearly has exploited that in every possible way, in every possible field of their interest to achieve their goal. So that, to my mind, is a very big challenge, and I really hope that that's something that Ukraine should not be struggling alone. That's where we all are in, and we all have equal risks that we taken, losing our people's sort of hearts and minds, losing our governments, losing our people's trust in institutions, losing people's trust in system, and ending up in chaos. And that chaos can be, of course, exploited in a very bad way.
Yeah, so the sum is the creation of chaos. There's the danger. Milan, opportunity and danger.
Well, first of all, let me say it's a thrill for me to be back here at Ukraine House, and I think the enthusiasm, the energy, the leadership is palpable. And to me, that is one of the great strengths of Ukraine, to tap what this next generation represents. And you see it in spades here, talented, skilled, committed, dedicated. So on the opportunity side, that to me is an enormous opportunity. I quite agree with Eva. I think first and foremost to continue that movement to the West, to Europe especially, to ensuring that this democracy can get stronger, its economy can get stronger, and it can deal with the kind of horrors it's had to confront in recent years. In addition, I think there are so many, and again, in terms of opportunity, Fred, so many fields in which this country, and I know much of the discussion here also focuses on the economy. After all, we're in Davos, right? But renewables and IT and even enhancing the productivity of agriculture and what it should be. So much possibility, but to ensure the realization of that possibility requires the hard work that many of you are involved in. And I want to say something that some of you may not feel is as central. Maybe it's more marginal, but to me it's central. And that is to ensure the leadership and the engagement in significant ways of your female population in the country. For too long, and this has been one of my hobby horses, I think Ukraine has not developed the possibilities that women represent. We can go into the political side, certainly the economic side, the taking this talent pool seriously, not doing what one former leader said, what do they know, they belong in the kitchen. That's not where this is. And I want to go back to mentioning Davos, because every year the World Economic Forum puts out a gender gap report. Now, nobody would accuse the World Economic Forum of being a women's organization. Why does it put out a gender gap report? Because it looks at the balance, if you will, the equality between men and women in a given society, in a country, on 4 metrics: health, education, economic participation, and political participation. And why do they do that? Because in those countries where there is greater equality, where the gap is narrow between men and women, those countries are far more economically competitive and far more prosperous. And that is, it's not just the right thing to do, that's important, but it is the smart strategic thing to do. And I think if you look at where Ukraine falls today on those rankings of countries, because the Gender Gap Report is a ranking, the World Bank's Women, Business, and the Law is a ranking, and that's what kind of regulations are in place, what kind of discriminatory practices that keep women from engaging in the economy. Again, not where it needs to be. And what all the data shows, whether it's from the private sector or the public sector, is that women drive economic growth. They have enormous barriers placed in their ahead of them and aside them that keep them from developing that potential. So I would say it's time, with all the fabulous changes in Ukraine, knowing there are huge problems, but it's time that this part of Ukraine, half the population, really began to flourish in ways that I think would bring enormous opportunity and possibility to the country in ways that it really needs to develop and grow. And on the deficit side?
Yeah, and I will ask a follow-up on the women and development question, but first go to the deficit.
Well,
side,
I
the
think
danger side.
obviously the danger is what the country is living with, not knowing what tomorrow brings. You know, we've had the annexation of Crimea, and then you've got what's happening in the Donbass. Now we've got international waters at play, and it's not just that, as horrible as it is, and you all know the repercussions better than any of us can study them, but it's also what Eva said, and that's this disinformation campaign. I can tell you as an American, I never thought that Russia had the possibility of doing what it did vis-a-vis the election. Now, there's massive investigations going on with the special prosecutor, et cetera, but we now know enough to know that Russia played a pivotal role in trying to get Trump elected. And it goes back to Ukraine, because Putin's interest was get rid of those sanctions and really recognize Crimea as a part of Russia. So all of these things, it's hard to segregate them, but they fit together very much, and they're grounds for concern. And that's why we have to keep developing the other side as well.
Thank you for that. One follow-up for you, which will be part of my question for Ivana as well, and then maybe you can address the issue of opportunity and danger as well. But my own anecdotal experience with Ukraine is lots of strong women, and so in a way you're saying it's not as developed, it's not where it should be. So maybe both of you can drill down on that a little bit more, which is, what is the evolving role of women in Ukrainian politics? How has it changed? So what changes has one seen of women's participation in public life?
Well, and I think you're right, Fred, and you hang around with some of the best women, but women's history in Ukraine has been, you know, that's where the resilience, the kind of, you know, 90% of the volunteers now keeping things together are female in Ukraine. But then look at the numbers in the parliament. they've always been abysmally low. There's been some change recently. Look at the numbers in the ministry. We have people like Ivana, but they are few and in between, in my view. Women in small business. Small business is the engine that grows economies. Small and medium-sized businesses. Women are struggling to get businesses off the ground. They have some 22%, I think, today. So there's a lot of room for improvement so that the people you know could be larger in number in terms of their impact on the society.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you tackle that one first, and then we'll back into the other questions.
So we'll start from women issues.
Start with women. And I think all of us here just felt it was great to have three leaders of your standing talk here. So I don't think we're here to listen to women leaders. We're here to listen to leaders. But the fact is, since Milan brought it up, and since it is a key issue for development in the country, I'd love to hear what you think the trends are in it.
Well, thank you, Fred, and I wanted to also use this opportunity to thank for this kind invitation. And I'm thrilled to actually know that Ukraine House in Davos is becoming a tradition, and I thank all the great women also that are standing behind this effort. Thank you, ladies. And I see how it's growing, how it's developing. I can only project the fantastic future for the Ukraine House Davos project, and I'm sure that it will grow and it will attract more and more people. So thank you. With regard to the issues that Milan brought to the discussion, I think after the Revolution of Dignity, the additional fantastic boost was given to increasing engagement of women in absolutely different societal groups in these societal activities, because I think that exactly what we've seen during Maidan, when both men and women were out there in the streets in the same numbers, in the same proportions, the same thing when women, as you've mentioned, went volunteering, helping to rebuild from the scratch, actually, or sometimes I use even like from below zero, the armed forces of Ukraine. At the same time, they went also and volunteered to actually fight for Ukraine, not only being volunteers. They all have felt the special empowerment that they have been taken upon themselves. For the first time, yes, I do totally agree, having 55% of population being women, having only 12% in the parliament, that's not a reflection of the society, but at the same time, that's the highest number we've ever had in the Ukrainian parliament, and I'm sure that that will further grow. Moreover, we have managed back in 2015, before the local elections, we have managed to put in the parliament, we have to put the quota of 30% for one gender in the party lists. It was a kind of a volunteer thing for the parties. Unfortunately, we have put some incentives in that law, but we have not put any punishment if they were not following the law, and now we are reconsidering this. But political parties have actually followed the suggestions, so to say, mainly, and as a result, on the level of like local communities and or rather on the level of districts, district councils, we have 1/3 of the councils where we have right now 30% of the women, which is already much better than it used to be when it was totally male-dominated. Well, it's still male-dominated, but it was totally male environment. So therefore, the situation is really seriously changing. Moreover, over this couple of years, we have taken off the ban that existed in Ukraine for more than 400 professions that were considered to be dangerous for women. And now we have a first woman diver who is there to protect women in people in the emergency situation. We have first women who actually are training dogs right now in the National Guard. So that has always been banned from Ukrainian women. So it's changing already. Moreover, we've opened up our military professions, and we've opened up the military positions for women, because when they initially went to fight for Ukraine, they were against Russian aggression, they were listed as accountants, as some cooks or something, even though they have been taking the guns and actually fighting. So right now they don't have these restraints, and right now they are fully engaged in the armed forces if they want to do that. So at this moment we have 10.6% of armed forces being women, which is very close to average in NATO, which is 10.9%. So I think we're fine right now there, and this is even growing tendency of women getting additional education, actually starting their military careers as well. So I think the playing field in this direction in Ukraine in a couple of years will be totally different. And that's why I also think that it's hard, it's incredible responsibility for all those women in Ukraine who are already holding the leadership positions, that they do their work. I think that we have to do our work like 300% better than men, in order to ensure that there is no fear of inviting additional women to the political parties, to actually giving them the way to work professionally in this or other field. So I think that by performing well, being right now in the government or being right now in the parliament, we are increasing the chances of more and more women having this political engagement and having also economic engagement as well. So I'm much more optimistic with regard to how we are proceeding, and I can, we are the first government in Ukraine that has decided that gender equality is the priority for the government. And first time in 2018, we have decided that this government of Ukraine will give the coordination of the gender equality policy to the level of the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm honored to actually hold that role. So this is another passion of mine. I can talk the whole hour or whatever we have about this, but I think that I want to come back right now for the question that you started.
Let me just say, I'm so glad we turned that question to you. That was, I think, a lot of people certainly not as aware of what's going on in Ukraine, didn't know a lot of that. And just listening to you, I'm sure the one kind thing you did is you didn't say being 300% better is a really easy thing to pull off.
Oh, definitely not.
Anyway, now biggest opportunity, biggest danger.
I will start, my fellow colleagues here, they've started from opportunities, and I will start from danger. Because I would like to start from the very uncomfortable truth for many in the Western societies. And the uncomfortable truth is that there is a war in the middle of Europe still going on, very hot war. There is no, the conflict is unfortunately taking away the lives of people every single day, is ruining the lives of civilians every single day. It's creating additional hardships and additional moral and economic pressure on the Ukrainian economy, on the Ukrainian society, and therefore definitely this is the major threat and major task that I think not only Ukraine has to fight against. And the uncomfortable truth is also that Europe is actually in the middle of this war. Europe is not somewhere aside. And unfortunately, this is not well understood in many of the European capitals. And unfortunately, we see the appetite still to this, as you were saying, this appeasement of the aggressor, and still ways of finding how to get back to business as usual on economic grounds, because we need to do business with the Russian Federation, as opposed to make sure that Russian Federation finally is taking international law seriously and taking the Western communities seriously. In this respect, I would go to another. That leads me to another discussion, other discussions that are taking place in Europe right now with regard to European future, because I think Europe is also in some kind of a confusion at this particular moment because of a number of reasons, and we can go into those. But I think discussing the future of Europe without participation of Eastern neighborhood, without participation of Ukraine, that actually leads us to kind of ill-designed European project, because Ukraine has always been culturally, historically, geographically part of Europe. It's just the matter of unfortunate history that we have been also been part of the have experienced for long centuries the influence, direct influence of the Russian Federation or the Russian Empire before that. But before that, before we were conquered, we've belonged to Europe. And we are still fighting even for our history to be told clearly and objectively, because Russia is not only stealing our current situation, is not only trying to steal our future, but is also stealing our past. So I think Ukraine being a prominent absentee in all these discussions about the future of Europe is not the right way to go. And that's another problem that unfortunately there is no, because Milan was talking that it's so important for Ukraine to move on with the transformation internally. I totally agree, but for that to happen much more efficiently, I think there has to be a clear signal from Europe, from the West, without the ambiguity that Ukraine is part of the family and will become the formal part of the European Union as well, when it is ready for that, when it goes through this whole transformation. And I want to remind everyone that Europe was and is about a dream. And I think that Ukrainians are the last romantics in Europe right now. And because at that time when everybody is complaining about bureaucracy in the EU, when everybody is complaining about the hardships of the not that well-being, I think Ukraine and Ukrainian people have proved that they are taking the flags of the EU to the streets and fighting for the values. And I want to remind why Europe was created. It was about the values. And I think that Europeans are actually in need to be reminded why their grandfathers have been forming the European Union and why this project has come across. And I think the opportunity there is that Ukraine can actually give a new breath to the European project, wider European project, and moreover the Western civilization project. And but Ukraine has to be given a hand, a shoulder, a engagement to be able to actually both withhold the Russian aggression, especially in the year of elections, and that's another great opportunity that Russian Federation sees for itself to actually reconquer Ukraine by its influence and reconquer their Soviet Union type of thinking, and continuing with further on attacking the Western civilization and those nations that have been developing so well.
Thank you for that. And the Atlantic Council, with its Digital Forensic Research Lab, will be forward-based in Kiev, monitoring disinformation campaigns and actions as well as election. So here I'm hearing the opportunity and the danger at the same time as Europe. So one more question for you, Eva, and then I'm going to turn to the audience because I know people have questions themselves. And I wonder if you can speak from the Latvians' point of view. Obviously, you've dealt with cyber attacks. You've dealt with hybrid issues. You're in Europe. What are lessons that Ukraine can extract from how you've dealt with Russia? Are there any you can extract, and vice versa? What lessons can you extract from Ukraine?
I'm sure there are lessons you can learn pretty much from every democracy now in Europe struggling with the same influence or manipulation or disinformation. I mean, whichever word you use. In Latvia, I mean, we have always seen that every sensitive political issue have been, in real life, so to say, have been accompanied with certain activities in the digital realm. with certain attacks, with some penetration, with some testing. So of course, you always have to be on guard, and I'm sure that's a permanent sort of status in Ukraine because the conflict, as the colleague mentioned, it's hot. There is always have to be on defense. I worked myself more sort of with a bigger policy scale in a country, and I found that the most challenging issue on cybersecurity part is to be cooperating, to get all institutions work together, not everyone, because everybody has their own assets, they have different leaderships, they have different sort of employees, different level of skills, different ambitions. They are willing or not willing to share how vulnerable they are or not. So really getting institutions to work together, at this point I'm speaking only about government, is already a complicated task. And then you add another complexity, which is the private sector, especially with all the critical infrastructure, starting from energy and ending up with all information space. So for me, the biggest challenge was getting those institutions to work together, not to shy away that there are problems, not to shy away when there has been vulnerabilities discovered, because companies like governments, like companies don't want to speak up for that. So this is really important, and there's a lot of different approaches. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's carrots and sticks together. Somewhere you can use incentives, somewhere you can really have to adjust regulation and really strictly require like critical infrastructure to report and monitor the systems. I mean, that was the most difficult part, because it's not hard to buy the newest technology or the newest software, but the problem is in cooperation between people, between institutions to achieve the result. So that's from cybersecurity. From misinformation, disinformation, influence campaign, I think Atlantic Council does a great job. They also work together with the NATO Stratcoms that we established in Riga.
Absolutely, we're in Riga with our team.
I know, yes. So I was honored to be part of developing that project, one of little babies. And I'm glad it worked so well, because when we started, everybody was sort of very skeptical. Everybody felt like, wow, this is sort of, what is that? Ministry of Defense wants to develop institutions that would be dealing with propaganda, like basically we will be brainwashing people. And we tried to explain that there is a war going in a digital domain, and then the Ukraine conflict broke out when there was not clear who is actually on the land fighting. And then only later people realized how much you can manipulate, to the point when people don't know who is fighting on the ground. So I think you really have to monitor, you really have to develop capacities of monitoring your networks, whatever is your information space. Because like you said, Putin keeps surprising, and of course methodology and technology keeps evolving. And you build the wall, and the wall is sort of go around, and you discover some tricks, and the new tricks are... So it's a permanent fight, but I think it's very important to keep a close eye and monitor. And another important part, as I can see from more European countries, is to really engage with those key private companies. And I'm not sure now in Ukraine's case, I mean, in Latvia we have Facebook, and Twitter has a big influence. So you really have to reach out to them and work with them together. I think the US elections did a great favor, because I think companies in Silicon Valley, where I am currently sitting, are finally starting to open up and starting to engage. I think the level of engagement could be better and bigger, given the big roles they can play in some countries. But I think there is now potential to work with them together, and governments really have to step in and have to proactively go there, meet them, talk to them, explain them. I mean, it's really, one would think in Ukraine that it's obvious and understandable. The moment you land in Silicon Valley and walk in their office, I mean, Ukraine is somewhere far away, and what is the problem? It's not really clear.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that. So I will go to the audience, but I think I'd be remiss with Milan here from DC. It's far away from Silicon Valley. It's also far away from Washington. And so I wonder if you could give us a lay of the land of where the politics is, because it could be confusing to people watching from the outside. The Helsinki summit sends you one message, but defensive weapons for Ukraine and the actions on Capitol Hill sends you quite a different message. So what is the political situation toward Ukraine?
Well, and that's exactly right. I think from the point of view of the United States, we are sending mixed messages. But let me just say that in terms of one message, it's been very strong, and that is from the Congress. There's tremendous support for Ukraine on both sides of the aisle in the United States, Republicans and Democrats. We just had a vote on whether or not the sanction against Deripaska should be watered down. It remains, but what happened in that test vote was rather extraordinary because more than 100 Republican congresspeople voted not to have the change happen and 11 Republican senators. So there's tremendous nervousness on the part of our Congress in terms of what is happening vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. Sanctions have been put in place. They have been renewed. There are countless sanctions now on different parties, as well as the fact that whatever the incident is, there will be pressure for more. But they have not, for the most part, with the exception of this, if it is indeed related, been pushed back. They're as strong as they have been. There have been the defensive weapons, finally, came through a while ago on the javelins. The air exercises that have been going on. So there has been a real commitment to the point of the view, frankly, that the president could not approve of the action because he would have been overridden. And then you've got the whole other part of this, you know, the horrific Helsinki press conference and whatever happened that nobody knows behind closed doors. But you've got an ongoing special prosecutor's investigation going on. And that every day is bringing out headlines that include headlines about Ukraine, because Manafort is on the threshold of going to jail. You all know what role he played in Ukraine. And, you know, the Republican platform was watered down. It was a very strong platform, pro-Ukraine platform, and then it was watered down at the Republican convention. Well, why was it watered down? And we've just learned in the last few days that pro-Russian Ukrainians were at the inauguration in significant numbers with significant resources. So this thing it's like a puzzle. What more is going to come out? Where's the next piece? But in terms of the Congress, in terms of the ongoing support, I think it's there. I agree with Fred. I think we should be doing more after the Azov incident. We had a statement from our now former ambassador at the United Nations, who called it a horrible escalation in terms of what it represented, a very tepid, in my view, response from the White House. But I think we need to keep sending messages that this is not going to be tolerated, because the push will continue to occur in all the myriad ways we've been discussing with tremendous consequences. The humanitarian crisis, I think, also deserves more support than it's gotten. The dire situation that in eastern Ukraine it is going through, the impacts that's having on the rest of the country, we need to be there, I think, with more positive support on the humanitarian side. And in the east, you know, the Russian faction will not allow any international assistance. So much more of a role we should be playing in ensuring that as much can get in, gets in. So yes, mixed, but I would say where it matters most, very strong support from the Congress on both sides of the aisle.
Thank you so much for that. And it doesn't happen just by accident. A lot of people are working at that, so that's terrific. And thank you for everyone who's doing that. So we've got until about 7:30, 7:35 at the outset. Let's do a lightning round. So I'm going to pick up some quick questions and then come back to the panel, because we don't have all that much time left. So I'm catching. I've got more questions myself, but I want to give people in the audience a shot. I'm sure Paul has a question.
Hi, Paul Grod, President of the Ukrainian Congress. in terms of engaging women, what are some quick fixes? I mean, there's a long-term strategy about changing mentalities, and it starts really at the home, at school, and among girls themselves. But what are some quick fixes that you see, for example, in Ukraine, that can be implemented rather rapidly?
So let me just see if I have others that want to jump in at this point. Quick fixes question. Let me take that to the. Please. I'm sorry.
It's fine. Lena Kazarni, Horizon Capital. Very quick. Nord Stream 2. Is it going to go ahead? Not going to go ahead? Your views?
Yeah, we were just talking about that. So let's take both of those questions and start right to left this time. So why don't we start with you, Ivana?
Well, with the quick fixes, Paul, I think that some of them have been already used, as I've said, opening up, clearing up all the bans that we've had before this, and making sure that we are following through with implementation. Because part of the thing is to actually change the legislation and open up the opportunities, but another one is to actually make sure that women are taking those opportunities that are opening up, and that men in the system, for example, in the armed forces or in the other kind of security and military establishments, that they are open to women coming in, and they are not biased. And I think that most of the quick fixes have been already put in place. When I came to the parliament, what was it, 5 years ago, 4.5. I was totally against quotas, for example. I thought that, well, we women can easily compete with men. I've always competed with men. I was dealing with the security matters. I thought that, yes, I've seen this, kind of not readiness to accept you from the very beginning, but at the same time I was able to compete. And I was totally against quotas. But I think that this is exactly, this is a kind of a temporary measure that is a quick fix, that gives you the need to follow the instruction of the law, and then becomes a tradition, then becomes the normality, which should be the normality. We're just coming back to normal. And so I think that right now, before the parliamentary elections, it also is important for us to have this quota for the national the political parties, that women would be engaged, moreover have the kind of positive outcomes for the political parties, and also have some specific measures for them if they are not being if they are not following the law. So I think that would be kind of the engagement. Also, in the whole other realm of engagement for women is the economic engagement, and we are right now with okay, I will not name the names, but some of my colleagues in the parliament, because they have not come up yet with the whole initiative, are working already on the legal act to promote the quotas in the boards of the both state-owned companies and private companies, having both men and women also represented equally. Or at least with some quotas of 30 or 40%. And I think that these are the quick fixes that will allow us to just use this as a practice. With regard to Nord Stream 2, that's...
Please do. I think you're really the person who has a lot of the insight on this. And we had a fascinating conversation before coming here on this regarding east-west border and that. So even though we're running short on time, I really wonder if you can capture what we talked about earlier.
Well, I'm afraid that Nord Stream 2 will be built because, unfortunately, our arguments from Ukraine, our arguments from our partners from Baltic countries, from Poland, are not being well digested in the other capitals and are not being well taken in the other capitals. And unfortunately, even the European Commission's proposal of having the same rules for underwater pipelines as there are rules for the ground pipelines in the EU are not being approved by the European Council. So therefore, I do not see when the agreement would come here in the on the EU side. I'm here I'm grateful for the position that the U.S. has in terms of actually clearly stating its non-acceptance of the development of this project. But so far, we also see that this is not leading to halting of this project as well. The question is when it's going to be built, and whether along the building of this Nord Stream 2, whether we will succeed together with the Russian Federation and the EU to come to any agreement on the transit through Ukraine. Because if we do not have transit to Ukraine, we have to through Ukraine by gas, we have to understand that this is a direct invitation for Russian Federation for another full-scale military attack on Ukraine. It's not only about economic losses that Ukraine will have. And so that's why Ukraine, knowing this, Ukraine has agreed to trilateral consultations with the European Union and with the Russian Federation. And just yesterday, we had yet another round of these consultations where Russian Federation was pretty clear. They do not see that the rules and procedures that are operational on the territory of the EU are already functional on the territory of Ukraine, and that we are ready to conduct any negotiations only on the basis of the European law, on the same rules and procedures that are functioning in the EU. And the EU is supporting this, but the Russian Federation cannot grasp this as such. So therefore, for them, the whole imagination of the issues of Russian interconnectors being placed on our western border, and that's what we've discussed with Fred, on our eastern border, as opposed to our western border, is not acceptable. I think the major thing that we've heard yesterday during this trilateral consultation is that Russian Federation is or will be ready to continue negotiations after May, which tells you, I think, that Russia has a big stake in the presidential elections in Ukraine. And I think that everybody has to be very, very seriously taking this signal. This is yet another signal. It's not that Russia, for the first time, has said something of this time. Putin has actually put it very blatantly himself that Russian Federation doesn't want to deal with the current president of Ukraine because they are looking for a person who would be more eager to play by the Russian rules. So I think we have to be very, very cautious about that, and understand that Russian Federation is also willing to come back to the table of negotiations in May, but also only discussing the continuation of this 10-year contract that is ending at the end of this year, which means that Russian Federation does not want to see the rules being changed. So I think all of this, unfortunately, tells you that Russian Federation is not going to play by fair rules when the Nord Stream 2 will be built, and that it will use it as a leverage over Europe, as it has been using for decades, gas issue over Ukraine. And that should be sobering for our European colleagues. That should be very clearly read by our European colleagues, and I think that lessons should be drawn now when it's not too late, and that when Russian Federation does not have this full-scale leverage over energy security of the European Union, since Nord Stream 2 is not built yet.
Thank you for that terrifically useful and informative answer. And I was remiss earlier not to salute Ambassador John Herbst and Shelby Magid, who are here from our team. I think we just got some marching orders for something to watch around the election. So let's keep our eyes really tightly on the energy question related to the election.
And let us count the ways that Putin can influence elections.
And
use them.
Let's do that as well, and we might be able to help you a little with that too. So, Milan, final words and quick fixes.
Just very quick to Paul's question. I think it's a matter both for the government and private sector. I think what we've seen in many of the companies in the West are significant investments in terms of helping women in small business, training, access to finance is a very big issue. I just came from a big event with Christine Lagarde and access to finance. Also markets, buying from women-run businesses, sourcing from them. So there's a whole lot in that category of economic. I couldn't agree more. I've never been a strong zealot for quotas, but increasingly I do believe that they're breakthrough. And I was in Ukraine the day that you all passed that law on the quota for local government. And while there were no punitive components to it, many of parties did abide by it and brought the numbers up significantly. I think if quotas are put in place, they should be temporary measures that can be sunsetted. And we've seen in other countries, they have opened the doors, and Denmark, for example, after several years, no longer needs the quotas because they've got a balance in terms of men and women participating fully. And then lastly, I would just say that Ukraine was the only country that has adopted a national action plan on women, peace, and security in the midst of a war. There are some 60, 70 countries that have a national action plan now. That calls for all the ministries to work together with the outside to ensure that these issues are integrated. It doesn't mean, it means when you're making decisions in government, you bring in that perspective and you also look at ways that you can enhance the participation of women. We've seen the difference already in Ukraine in terms of the patrol police and the impact the women are having. Their numbers dramatically increased. Issues like violence against women now are being reported. Actions are being taken. There's been a lot of progress, and this woman to my right is coordinating a great deal of that. And I can't think of a lot of things in the midst of all of the dangers that we don't keep investing so that the dangers are less dangerous because we've made these full investments in our people, half the population and more.
And we are taking the National Action Plan on 1325 also now to the regional authorities and moreover to the level of amalgamated communities. So it's it's much wider and much deeper right now than it was 2.5 years ago when we first adopted it. We've right now adopted the updated version of the plan for the next 2 years. So engaging also those ministries that have not been there when we initially planned it, because the Ministry of Temporary Occupied Territories was not non-existent at that point when we came with the first plan. So we are it's a working and very active progress. And thank you, Milan, for mentioning that we are the only country in the world that has adopted this plan during the war.
And as I sit here, I never thought I'd see the day when the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine, the Ministry of Interior, have made huge progress in this space. So we can't, as you well pointed out, neglect the progress, but there needs to be much more because of what it represents.
Eva, final words.
An honor to close. A little bit on women, if I can. I can only add, I'm not actually an expert sort of on the issue in general, and I think quotas obviously is a good pushing mechanism. I'm the one in practice, a woman in leadership in practice, and speaking from my practice and actually also following a little bit debate in Silicon Valley, I also want to reemphasize the point that not only getting women in that position, but also making that possible for women, still being a family and having a children to make it work for them. I mean, Silicon Valley, it's a big issue for helping with breastfeeding, helping with multiple other issues that enables those women who not only choose between career and family, but actually can do both. I mean, Sweden, obviously, and Scandinavian countries where they give a possibility to choose for a father or mother. I mean, a lot of little things that can be done, not necessarily need to be put in laws and regulations. I think private sector can be really inventive and helpful in leading up those initiatives like it is in Silicon Valley. I mean, a lot of companies step up and demonstrate and invent and do things, and I think that's equally important, at least from my sort of own practice. And I mean, I won't speak on energy. I also not that big in details there, but I would like to say that I think Europe is still with Ukraine. Europe is supporting Ukraine. I don't want also Europe to be judged by some single bad decisions, individual profiles sometimes by some governments, one has to acknowledge that Russian influence is working also in Europe, and also Europe is caught by surprise. And I think some of that leadership is already a result of systematic work. So I wouldn't say that some leaders that are at power in Europe actually represent the overall sentiment in Europe. So I'm more hopeful. I want to believe in my own people, in my country. I can speak for Estonia, obviously, on behalf of my husband. But I think also looking at Europe, I think Europe is more aware. It understands much better. And I think they do stand with Ukraine. The question, of course, is how efficient and capable they are actually to do things against that aggressive behavior.
Just not to be misread, on behalf of the Ukrainian government, on behalf of Ukraine, I totally agree and value and cherish all the support that we are receiving from the European Union, from the other Western countries, from the US, from Canada, and from the Western community. And you know, actually it is the unity and support that is to Ukraine that is getting Russia by surprise. But I was specifically, and Ukraine's own answer, active resistance to the aggression. That's another surprise for Russian Federation. They were not expecting that. But I was specifically talking about Nord Stream 2, and there I think that the mistakes that are being made by allowing this, this Nord Stream 2 being built and being driven by businesses from within the European Union, but being driven by the totally geopolitical agenda of the Russian Federation, that is something that unfortunately will be felt very negatively as a consequence later on by the European Union, and not only one or two countries.
Did I see you reaching for your microphone, Milan?
I could, but I won't because I know you want to close. But I would just say that, you know, it took the interference in the American election. It took what happened in Brexit. It took the inspiration that Ukraine has represented in terms of embracing those European values. You know, it's been a learning process, and much to our peril, any of us, do we take any of this for granted?
Yeah, and if there's one thing you learn by looking around this room and from the work that we've been doing at the Atlantic Council, is it takes a community. It takes a number of institutions. It takes a number of people, and this is a cause that's well worth fighting for, and we certainly believe that. To close, I want to thank these amazing women, amazing panelists, amazing leaders. I want to thank Alexa and House of Ukraine. It's great to see wonderful friends here, Lena, Paul, Ian, and so many other people who I see here and recognize from previous combat together. So thank you very much for being here, and please give this panel a big round of applause.
Slide.